tonight's episode. It features several bone-chilling accounts of real-life encounters with Skinwalker beings. Are they real, or just a figment of the imagination? Lock your windows, lock your doors, and enter the alternate nightmare. Story 1. Trying to get into my house. You can call me Derek, and I am a father of 3, living in Highland, Utah. I rent a house here on the outskirts of town. About 50% of my block is undeveloped land, but I live in an area with very little crime, so it is generally safe. I am currently unemployed after being laid off from my job as a machinist. I had been working 6 days a week for 6 months straight. In fact, I was, and still am doing what I can to save up enough money for a cross-country move. I like getting out of the house and exploring the land around me. The undeveloped parts are perfect for this. It is quiet and secluded. I can go out there with my friends, my kids, or on my own with no real worry of anything happening. My wife stays at home since she is now expecting our 4th child. She enjoys plants and gardening, so she spends a lot of time in our backyard with those activities. I want to make sure they are safe. I wanted a job that would keep me busy and be fulfilling, but my wife and I agree that it is more important to be home with the kids right now while we're about to have another. The day before my neighbor called me, things were no different than usual. I was up early and had breakfast while my wife fed the kids. I went out to enjoy some fresh air while they were busy. It was a lovely day to sit out on the porch and enjoy the weather. I stayed out there for an hour or 2 before my wife came out to join me with a cup of coffee. We stayed out there until the kids were done with their breakfasts, and then we went in to give them their baths. My neighbor was outside too, looking a little nervous. He called me over to speak to him. He began telling me if I saw the shape last night by the back side of our house. I asked him what he was talking about. I wasn't sure. He began to tell me he saw a tall, upright walking coyote trying to open the back door to our house last night. He said he yelled at it and scared it off. He was asking me why would this animal be trying to break into my house. He told me to be careful. Later that night, I was up late, reading a good book. Actually, it was after midnight and I think just about everyone else was asleep by this point. I was the only one awake. I began to hear scratching on the outside of the house. I had completely forgotten what my neighbor had told me at this point. I got up and went to see where the noise was coming from. As I made my way downstairs, the sounds were getting louder. I slowly crept down the stairs to where the noises were. They stopped as I reached the bottom steps. I turned on the lights, but didn't see anything outside the sliding glass door. I walked over to the sliding glass door and turned the outside porch light on. Nothing. However, off a little ways, I see a tall silhouette of a figure. It took me a second to realize it was the coyote. It was larger than what I had initially thought. It began to walk towards the light. I could clearly make out its legs, arms, and head from the light of the outside porch. It walked very slowly, almost like it was taunting me. It stopped once it reached the porch light. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like an upright man, but it had the head of a coyote. I stood there, frozen in shock and fear. I didn't know what to do. We had a dog, but he was sleeping inside and couldn't help me. I thought about getting my wife's gun, but by the time I could have got it, this thing would have already been through our sliding glass doors. The coyote man looked at me and just stared. It then, very slowly, turned around and walked back away from the light and disappeared. I was too scared to even move. I waited until I saw it leave my yard and contemplated calling the police. I realized what good that would even do. A coyote is trying to break into my place. That's a quick way to sound crazy. I sat down on the couch and simply waited until morning light. My wife was wondering why I was sleeping on the couch. I didn't tell her. I didn't want to scare her. I spoke to the neighbor that same day and told him what I saw. That's when he got really pale and began telling me about Skinwalkers, something I had never heard of until this very point. He explained to me they are evil beings. They will shapeshift to animals like coyotes or deer and perform acts of evil. It was after this that I started lining my house with salts and burning sage. I wasn't going to take any chances. After this, I stopped having issues and this thing never showed back up. We ended up moving from that house about a year after to Southern California. Haven't looked back since. Story 2. Not my dog. I'm not sure if this belongs in this sub, or where I should repost it, just looking for some guidance. Not sure what is going on. I live in the suburbs in Arizona, right by a mountain preserve. There are plenty of washes around. We get coyotes, bobcats, raccoons, the usual. We have plenty of chickens and 5 dogs. 1 wolf dog, 1 big male Akita, 3 Anatolian shepherds, 2 are male puppies though. The dogs are inside dogs, but we let them into the yard and they have free roam. We have a 6-foot wall around a large yard. We have neighbors on all 3 sides of the wall. One of the houses to the side is vacant, and the one directly behind us, the owner hasn't been home for about a month. On both sides of his house is a wash. About a week ago at dusk, my sister had called for all the dogs to come inside. She saw one of the pups walking away from her and into some bushes out of sight and called to it. I asked her what she was calling to, and she said the pup. I said no, he's right here. Which he was. All the dogs were accounted for. We just brushed it off as strange but didn't think much of it. Last night, around 12:30 at night, my father and I are awake in the family room. We hear a large bang from outside, which sounds like a trash can lid closing. So we send out the Akita, and we grab lights and head outside. We check the trash cans. Nothing is disturbed as far as we can tell. I notice my sister has come to the door because she heard the bang too. I head back in to talk to her, when my dad pops his head in and asks if we let out the puppies. We say no, and he gets mad and responds that he's right there outside. The Akita we let outside is standing next to my father. Our 4 other dogs are laying right inside. We watch as what is not our pup, but looks like his backside, walk behind our greenhouse and out of sight. The same dog that my sister had seen the other day. Same size, same color, same curly tail. Both times, we only saw its backside. There's no chance this breed is running wild in Arizona. That pup has also recently gotten a scar across his muzzle, but we thought it was from the other dogs picking on him more than usual lately. He is also the only dog that barks at his reflection at night in the windows. Our dogs usually run around the yard day or night playing. In the past few days they have been hanging around the door while they are outside, or around us when we go outside. They have been uncomfortable recently, which is weird for them. The 5 together in the yard fear nothing. The smallest are literally the 2 male puppies weighing in at 70 pounds each. What we saw looked exactly like him. At least what we saw, which was his backside. We didn't follow because of everything I read on these subs say not to. And not knowing what it was, I wasn't about to take that chance without some guidance. There is no chance this is a wild dog hopping our 6-foot fence. There are no wild Anatolian shepherds in the area. It's more of a rare breed. Any thoughts on what it could be or what it wants? Also, side note, we usually don't hear other dogs barking at night. We've heard more than ever recently, but only on days that we have not seen the dog. Story 3. Strange encounter at night. Just a little context about myself. I live in Southern California near the Mojave Desert. Beyond our backyard is an open desert which is home to coyotes. We never had any problem with coyotes, and we have a brick wall as a fence in our backyard. Also, I believe it when I see a type of person. I haven't really put much thought about skinwalkers until fairly recently, thanks to all these TikTok videos that only come at night. Last night, I had a weird encounter when I had to let my dog out to pee. It was about 3 a.m. in the morning, and as usual after I let her out I go back to my room and wait for her to bark to be let back in. After about 15 or so minutes, I hear her barking heavily outside. As I went to go check it out, I made a crucial mistake and whistled, as that's how I get her attention, and signal her to go back in. She's usually pretty obedient and listens to me, but this time she just wouldn't budge, and kept on barking at the corner of our backyard. So I went and investigated what it is she's barking at, and that's when I heard an owl hoot. Pretty normal so far, as she's usually easily timid when it comes to noises. As I tried to grab her, that's when I thought I heard a person's voice say, "Hey," which got me shook, but then I told myself maybe it was just an owl hooting. I went ahead and continued to try and grab my dog, but she ran the opposite way, and this time I heard a very weird like mimic of an owl hooting but mixed with a deep human voice. The first thing on my mind was I need to go back inside, grab a gun because maybe someone is trying to rob me. But then I also didn't want to leave my dog behind, and it's very unlikely that they'll be able to scale the fence that easily. Now, at this time is when I noticed the air smelled like a pile of meat was left under the sun for days, mixed with some rotting food. Then, all the Skinwalker videos from TikTok came rushing into my head, and I wondered maybe I'm overthinking. So, I told myself, okay, if this is my time to go. But I have to grab my dog before I go back inside. Also, during this time, the mimic owl hooting is getting faster and eventually, finally started to sound like an actual owl hooting. I don't know why, but this kinda gave me closure that maybe I was overthinking it. I was able to finally grab my dog, and I rushed inside, locked the door, and went to grab a gun and an emergency flashlight. As I went back outside, I can still smell, but very faintly, that rotten egg and meat smell. The hooting finally stopped, checked the corner, and didn't find anything. After being outside for about 5 to 10 minutes, I decided maybe I am still half asleep. As I was walking back to go inside the house, I glanced once more time at the corner, and I'll never forget how bright the eyes were of the owl staring back at me, and the ominous vibe it was giving. I quickly turned my eyes away and went inside the house, locked all the doors, and closed the curtains. I am not 100% sure what I heard in last night, but as I was inspecting the sand from outside of the fence this morning, I didn't see any footprints of any kind. So, for now I am hoping that maybe it was just a regular owl with throat problems. But I could never forget those ominous bright yellow eyes. Story 4. The English Skinwalker. To this day, I still don't know what happened or how to explain it. I live in Yorkshire, England, which, in some places, is a very green area with loads of trees, etc. Where I lived as a child growing up. I lived relatively close to a woodland area with roughly 5 to 10 miles of woodland. Now, as a kid, this was amazing with my friends, as we could play hide and seek, or build tree houses and forts for hours. So, I was never scared of it with or without friends. On one situation, I was walking in the woods when I was around 8 alone. I remember it being dark, but only around 4 or 5 p.m., so it must have been the winter season. My friends and I had been working on a fort, and I was collecting sticks for it in my spare time, as I was really devoted to it. Fun fact, when I went to visit my hometown last year, the fort was still there, just looking extremely abandoned with old cans and crisp packets on the floor. I knew roughly where I was, but wasn't too sure, when I found a weird formation of rocks. It didn't mean anything to me, as me and my friends made things like this, but this was not us and it was definitely man-made. I decided to stay around the area because I didn't want to get lost. After 2 or 3 trips back from there to our fort, I noticed a deer in the woods. My dad had told me there was deers and foxes in the woods, but uncommon to see. I was so excited, so I followed it. Now, looking back on it, it moved very unnaturally, with it almost jumping and skipping like it was brand new to walking on 4 legs. As a kid, I didn't think anything because I'd never seen a deer before, so I didn't know how they moved. A couple minutes after following it, I fell over a rock and made a huge crunch on some sticks. The deer froze. It slowly turned around and stared in my direction, so I slowly got back up and stared at it behind a tree. It sniffed around the stones and suddenly stared at me. I'd say it was like around 100 to 150 feet away from me, so I got scared and ran away. I ran for a minute or 2 until I caught my breath. I remember I had a mixture of excitement, but also nervousness. I turned around to look back at the direction I ran, and, to my surprise, the deer was there, staring at me. I hadn't heard anything follow me or anything. This really freaked me out, so, out of pure terror, I run back out of the forest and didn't stop until I was safely out. The entrance to the woods where I got in and out was down a steep hill, so I got to the bottom onto the street and stared back up. My heart was racing, and there it was still looking out of the woods at me. It terrified me, and still to this day I can still remember the chill that went down my spine. I was so scared I started crying when all I heard was "don't." I looked around and no one was there. Then I heard "come back please" in an almost human voice. I could make out the words, but it sounded almost inaudible, like an old radio. I ran back to my house and cried to my mom and dad, but they didn't know what to say. I had nightmares but still couldn't figure it out. I didn't go into that woods for a good couple months until I started going back with my friends again. The woods gave me a chill, but I never had an experience like that again. I only realized what it could have been after reading up on Skinwalkers a couple years back with me connecting the dots. I'm sure it was a Skinwalker. I'm happy I ran, and I'm happy I didn't stay, but I'll never know what could have happened if I went back in. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe for more stories of horror, fright, and terror.